Hey everyone, this is Derrick from Jurassic Time. I am with James Mottram, who was the writer of the annotations for the Jurassic Park script book that just came out back in December.
Hi Derek, how you doing?
Doing all right. So there's some really interesting news that just came out recently. David Koepp, who was the original screenwriter of Jurassic Park, whose script is in this entire book that you did the annotations for, he is now going to be the writer of the new Jurassic Park or slash Jurassic World movie, whichever it's really going to be. We're still not entirely sure. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, very exciting because they're going back to, obviously Michael Crichton was our, originator of this wonderful story, but Koepp's as you say, Koepp's the man that adapted the book into Jurassic Park. Then he did The Lost World, and he's kind of been involved with all of them on some level since then. I think he sort of took a look at Jurassic Park 3 at one point. I definitely remember for the most recent Jurassic World, I think he kind of, he did a very small amount of work on it, uncredited, obviously. So he's just along with Spielberg, obviously, he kind of feels like the godfather of the Jurassic film franchise to me. So to have him back writing an original story is great. I mean, I guess he hasn't done that, right? And because he's obviously the main ones he's done have been adapted from the Crichton books. So it'll be interesting to see. Oh well, you said, is it going to be Jurassic Park or Jurassic World? I actually heard Bryce Dallas Howard on the radio the other day when she was promoting Argyle, and of course they were asking her about this, and she said, well, she sort of referred to it as Jurassic World 4, so I don't know if that's what they're kind of going to be calling it. I guess it makes sense, doesn't it, that they're going to sort of, unless they literally go back in time before the Jurassic World franchise began, which I suppose they could do. Um, but it feels like they're going to carry on now with the dinosaurs across the world. I mean, we've only really scratched the surface of that in one film, so it feels like Koepp's now, the chains are off, as it were, and he's got license to go anywhere. And of course, she, as in Bryce, did point out she'd had no conversations about her character coming back. Now, of course, it's very, very early days, but you'd sort of imagine that he will probably remove most of those characters and the legacy characters as well, and just start with a clean slate. To me, that feels like the most sensible thing to do. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting that they're doing this so soon. That's the most shocking thing to me is that it's already happening now. I mean, I understand maybe being in like the production or pre-production stages for something like this, but from the sounds of it, they've been in pre-production for a while since he's already basically done with the script or nearly done with it. And apparently their plan is that they're going to start shooting this year to have it out in time for next year. I mean, we'll see if that really happens, but that's a very quick turnaround for a new movie after the last movie that just came out about 2 years ago. So, I mean, it's really, really quick turnaround. But it is great that it is David Koepp doing the script because, like you said, he is the other major writer of Jurassic Park in terms of the films. I mean, since he did work very closely with Crichton's scripts and Molly Scott-Marmol's script and everything, he kind of did rewrite a lot for The Lost World. Like, they definitely changed that novel around for the screen. So we already kind of have like a little taste of what it's like for him to have like a more original spin on the story in the Jurassic world, if you will. But it's going to be interesting to see what kind of story he comes up with post Dominion because that's something I've been struggling with. It's like, what exactly do you do? Like the island, or at least Nublar is gone. Sorna, they hardly ever talk about anymore, as if it is gone. And then, Biosyn they introduced and brought in dots and everything, and now that's all gone too. So it's like, what more is there in terms of like to pull from the lore or to create new lore? I guess is what his biggest task is with new characters.
Yeah, no, I've wondered that too. As to will they just abandon the Crichton books in the sense that they've already been mined, and I mean, I wondered if the Netflix animation show, if that might provide some sort of, some characters there could be brought to life from, the animated show into reality. I don't know if that would work, if he would do that. I mean, that was a popular show. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that could work?
Yeah, I mean, actually, there's a sequel show coming out on Netflix called Jurassic World Chaos Theory. And it's going to continue with the characters from Camp Cretaceous. So I don't know. I mean, since they're doing that, I feel like, well, they're probably not going to do a movie with them now, but I guess it is still possible because they are pretty popular characters at this point. So I mean, anything is really possible to have any kind
And
of
yeah,
crossover.
and I think the thing is, we all think as Jurassic fans, we all think about Kep as the as the Jurassic writer, and of course he is. But you forget what other amazing stuff he's done. I mean, he did the first Mission Impossible. He did the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man. Recently, he's just had in Sundance Presence, this ghost story that's directed by Steven Soderbergh. He did another Soderbergh movie a couple of years ago, Kimmy, I think it was called. So he's not, they're not just wheeling him out because for fan service. The guy is a regular writer. He's writing novels as well and publishing novels. So he's continued, working on great stuff and producing good movies, and which I think really has a reputation as one of the best writers in Hollywood for a reason. So I am excited to see what he does, even if they don't return any characters, say like Bryce's character or Chris Pratt's character. Do you feel like they're going to make reference to events of Dominion or earlier, as you say, the lore, basically? Do you think that will happen, or do you think it will be a real wipe the slate clean? We know there are dinosaurs in the world. Let's just invent some new adventure. I don't know. I'm curious to see what shape that story will take.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on how far in the future of the timeline we're going. Like, what if it's set 20 years from Dominion to see how the world has really changed with the dinosaurs out? I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, but the only danger is for it becoming too much like Planet of the Apes, which there's already a new movie coming out for that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure they're aware of that. I mean, they even had a pair of the original writers that were doing the Apes movies for the first Jurassic World. They were originally attached, but then they ended up not using their script for the first Jurassic World. So the whole dinosaurs taking over the world scenario, like I just never really got into it. Almost didn't even really buy it either, to be honest.
With the apes films, the apes are humanoid on some level, and you kind of relate to them as human characters. I think perhaps less so with the dinosaurs. But I'm wondering, in the sense that they're not meant to be human, So yes, they're going to be. I think what you see in Dominion is they're all over the world now, and some of them live in sort of harmony, and some of them are being chased by park rangers and things like that. And so you kind of think, well, what else can happen now? Surely that's always going to be the way. The dinosaurs will get used to living in certain areas, and maybe humans will steer clear of them. Or is it going to be a case of another Dodgson-like figure coming in to sort of exploit them in some way? Because we were, they touched on, and I really wished there'd been more of this in Dominion. But you see the underground markets, which I thought was a really cool idea, and I don't think you saw nowhere near as much as I thought you were going to see of that underground market, because of course they had action, fights and chases all the way through that market. So you're only ever going to glimpse it. But I like that idea of this black market of dinosaurs being sold and traded. So I guess maybe they'd continue with that, but unless you get another John Hammond-esque figure who wants to sort of, well, not necessarily create a theme park, but something specialist that very wealthy people can come in and have an experience with the dinosaurs. But again, that sounds far too much like the original Jurassic Park. So yeah, it would be really interesting what on earth Kep has done with it. I mean, do you think we could see Blue or Beta again? I mean, certainly Beta, the younger one.
I mean, that would go, give some fan service to people that love those characters, if you will, from the Jurassic World movies. But I mean, it's as long as they don't go the human hybrid route. I mean, that'd be one way to have a human connection with the dinosaurs. Like grab those ugly ideas from Jurassic Park 4 that never happened.
The legendary John Sayles script, you mean? Or yeah, well, maybe he's just maybe him and Sayles have secretly got together and cooked up. Well, that was a crazy script, but it rather than doing something a bit more, well, tied to the original theme park sort of thing, and then I suppose you had Dodgson and Bios in doing something completely crazy with like some mad guy in a castle with crazy dinosaurs and things. That might be fun. I mean, but it also might get laughed off the screen. So I just don't know with something like that.
Yeah, I think they learned after the reception of the script when it leaked, like 20 years ago or however long it was. And, I think they knew wisely not to go down that path, even though they had some cool designs and some cool ideas. But it's just that's for a different movie, not for a Jurassic movie, I think everyone agrees with. Now that Dodgson's out of the picture, they're like, oh, we just moved all the dinosaurs that are running around to the Biosyn Sanctuary. So, maybe they'll, like you said, have some Hammondly like figure try to like allow rich people to come there just to view them. Like we're not creating anything anymore, we're just viewing. But, there's still, like you said, a lot of untapped material to expand upon post Dominion, including like, who else is creating dinosaurs illegally? Because someone must be, because there wasn't that many dinosaurs on the island to, different species.
Yeah, rather than human dinosaur hybrids, maybe it'll just be sort of continued experimentation, mutations possibly, and some kind of outbreak like that. But then it turns into sort of an alien style movie. So yeah, it's a really tricky one as to what to do with that. Because you kind of feel like in a way Dominion was not the end of it, but it's like, well, where do you go from here? I mean, we'll say, I hope he comes up with a brilliant idea, but I think, the fact that the film just crept over Dominion, that is, just crept over $1 billion, they're always going to go back and tap that market because the Jurassic fan base, as we well know, is huge. And of course, they're going to come out and see something. I mean, I think you're right. I think 2 years is a bit soon. Maybe like 5 years would have been a nice, nice little gap that would have created that real hunger. But maybe they just think, let's get it out there now while we know there's still a big fan base, even though we know the Jurassic fan base has survived for 30 years now, 31 years. So, they'd happily wait another couple of years, I'm sure, certainly if it meant the quality was higher. But, I think with kept writing, I'm very, very positive about that, enthusiastic about that. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I don't know how much you could say here, but did Kep ever say anything when you interviewed him for the book that kind of hinted at that he was gonna do another one, or
Sadly
no?
not. No. No, I don't think he was good. It was about where are we now? It's February, isn't it? So it was kind of March, I think, last year when I ended up speaking to him. So hard to know if he would have even been on the project then. Probably not, but maybe he'd had early conversations. But no, obviously we stuck to Jurassic Park, and yeah, I don't think he was going to tell me 11 months in advance of that news breaking that he was working on a secret Jurassic World 4 story. But yeah, I'll be very curious to talk to him again at some point about what he actually got to do and how he steered that script, because like we were just saying, he hasn't actually done a full Jurassic script since The Lost World. So yeah, it's great to have it. I mean, really, that's 95, right? 96. Yeah, it's been a long time since he's properly put his mark on a Jurassic story. So although, as I say, he has kind of been involved in small capacities along the way, and he's obviously watched from the sidelines as the Jurassic World franchise has grown. So yeah, he probably thought now is the time. I feel like I'm ready to go back and and do it. So yeah, but I'm a big fan of his. I think he's great. He was also incredibly generous with his time. I'd already spoken to him for the Jurassic Park visual history book, and I went back to him for a second time for the script book. And yeah, he was, he like, as I no doubt I would be. There's some things he struggles to remember now because we are talking 30 years ago, but there are some moments he's very sort of clear on. And yeah, so he's a brilliant guy.
Yeah, what was the process like to talk to people like David Kep and anyone you interview really for these books?
Well, luckily I had, well, for two of them, I only really spoke to three people because obviously I really wanted to speak to obviously people connected to the script. So obviously Michael Crichton sadly passed away a long time ago, so couldn't speak to him. I had been in touch with his wife and his daughter again for the visual history book. So I did try and connect with them to see if they had anything, let's say old scripts that might have annotations on from him, that type of thing. anything like that. But I didn't really get very far with that, unfortunately. So obviously the main people to get hold of was David, who I'd already spoken to for the visual history book. And then thanks to your good self, Rick Carter, who again I'd already interviewed, but it was you that obviously pointed me in the direction of Rick's own unique script, let's call it. So I think Rick was the first person I spoke to, actually, and then David not long afterwards. And then, the big one for me was tracking down Malia Scotch Marmo, who obviously wrote the kind of middle script, let's call it, between Crichton, Crichton, Carter, then her, then Kep. And she, as far as I'm aware, because I sort of Googled her extensively, hadn't really talked about it since the making of book by Jodie Duncan back when the original movie came out. And there's a few quotes from her in that book. And, she's had a, lovely career before and after Jurassic. And obviously she's not credited on Jurassic Park, but, and she just, it was a long time ago for her. And she hasn't really spoken about it. So to get hold of her was fantastic. And she was, again, incredibly generous with her time and the fact that she did it at all, because it must be quite strange for a screenwriter who's not been credited to then talk about a project, because I'm sure that emotionally you would have invested a hell of a lot. This is albeit 30 years ago now, but invested a hell of a lot in that process, for those few months that she was on it. And of course, I think there is a quote from her in the Jodie Duncan book about, she doesn't use the word heartbreaking, but it's kind of, when Spielberg finally called her and kind of said, I've read it, and it's a pass kind of thing. Not quite as sort of tough as that, but of course that's going to be heartbreaking for a writer, especially when you're working with someone like Spielberg. And of course they had a pre-existing relationship from Hook. So yeah, for her to come back to me and talk to me about, again, a project that she hadn't thought about probably for 30 odd years. And I know that from what she did that, shall I tell you the process of how I got to her? Is that interesting? And then
Yeah, because I mean, I actually tried looking for her for a while, and it was impossible to find her like on social media or like a representative kind of website or anything like that. So yeah, how did you get a hold of her?
now I'm trying to, now I say this, I'm now trying to remember the exact process, but I think I've found details of her, not representation in what you're talking about, i.e. publicists, managers, that type of thing. But there was a name and email address and number for her, what I assumed was her husband, and indeed was her husband, who I guess some extent manages her affairs or so forth. And I contacted him and I didn't really hear anything. And then there was a phone number, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to ring it. And I rang it and I got through to him, and he was lovely. Then I think eventually, I think we had a phone call and we spoke, and that wasn't sort of on the record. It was just a kind of like, she wanted to know more about the project. And look, in the end, she sort of admitted she's quite reserved, and she's not publicity seeking or anything like that. And but she seemed to enjoy what I had to say and what I wanted to do with the book. And then she came back to me and said she'd rather do it over email, which I've done email interviews before. They have their pros and cons. The cons being, you can't really come back at someone when they say something to you. You can't then go back and say, oh, but what about this? I mean, you could do it over email, but really it doesn't have the same flow as a phone or Zoom interview. So I was a little bit skeptical of that, but actually her answers, and she came back really quickly with her answers, and they were really good. And she went through a bunch of old materials, so she dug out script notes and that kind of thing. So she had clear memories of what she did, and that was sort of it, really. The answers that appear in the book are primarily from those email answers that she gave me. Yeah, I was delighted to finally get her on the record, because I think, as I'm sure you'll agree, a bit like Rick's contribution, those script stage, as in with any script from any movie, the drafts written by other writers are not useless. They're not thrown away and ignored. Even if they are ignored, in a way, they're still pointing you in another direction. So that's always a useful step. And I think, from having read all those scripts, that the Crichton ones to hers, well, via Carter's unique little take, to her to Kep, are really interesting stages, because things do float through all of them. And yeah, so I think she deserves, well, as I said, she's not credited physically on the movie, but I think in a book like this, I mean, she's certainly mentioned in the visual history book and in the Jodie Duncan book, of course. This obviously is a specific book about the script, and she needs her due in that. And I'm really glad she did want to talk, because it would feel weird to not have her, quoted and talking about her contribution. So, and I think hardcore Jurassic fans will know her name, and know, even if they've watched the movie 100 times, and obviously you never see her name on the movie, I think most hardcore fans know who she is. They'll know about her contribution, but maybe won't necessarily have read much from her, because there isn't much out there from her. So yeah, I'm really pleased that she did contribute. It was my little, so it's quite hard to get I'm not sure if I'd call it a scoop exactly, but to track someone down and get them to talk on the record about what is a massive film, and has become a massive film. And just sort of backtracking slightly into what we were talking about with, so obviously, as as we've just explained, I spoke to Malia and David, but the Rick Carter was the first one that I spoke to, as I remember. And again, obviously, as I said, I'd spoken to him for the visual history book. But yeah, well, as I say earlier, it was thanks to you to sort of pointing out the Carter script, which, to my shame and embarrassment while writing the visual history book, I really didn't know anything about. But in a way, it was quite good, because I'm not even sure if that would have made the cut in the visual history book, given how much stuff just had to get cut out because of word length, which was infuriating. But that's the nature of publishing books. There is a sort of word count, and you can't mushroom over it. So I'm quite glad in a way, because it then saves the Carter stuff for this book, for the script book. And again, well, you'll probably know better than me as to how many hardcore Jurassic fans are aware of the Carter script. My guess is not that many, at least until now. But what would you think?
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't that many people that knew about the Carter script. It was a pretty recent find that I made because I had like access to his files basically. And even Rick had forgotten about it when I, eventually told him about it and did the little Rick Carter's Jurassic Park program that I made with a bunch of people. He had forgotten about it. He was like, "Oh yeah, I did that." And but he seemed kind of proud of it too, in a way, because that's the only time he had ever done any kind of script, really. Because I mean, that's not usually what a production designer does, and he has not done that before or since Jurassic Park. So, it definitely was a special project of him, for one, but also special enough for him to kind of go that extra mile just to get his ideas across, and the ideas of the art department, to kind of gather them all together and present them to Steven in a way that's comprehensible. So, and it's kind of interesting, because what Rick did was he took Crichton's script and he kind of rewrote the opening segments of it. Then the middle is kind of the same as Crichton's script, with just a few different changes and tweaks. But then it's like the final third is completely rewritten, and it's like all Rick for the whole finale and everything. So it's pretty interesting that he did that.
I think the funny thing is that what I find strange, in the fact that I didn't know about it when I was doing the visual history book, is that everything around him doing that script I sort of did know about. So what I mean by that is, like you mentioned, there's sort of, they were having, obviously you had Spielberg and Kep, but then you'd have meetings with all the visual effects guys, and obviously Carter was sitting in on those meetings, and the art guys like John Bell. So they're all sort of there having these kind of like brains trust kind of encounters, where they're all swapping ideas. And because obviously they were, this was cutting edge technology at the time. They didn't really know what they could make work from the book and couldn't make work. So they were sort of brainstorming ideas basically. And Carter, I guess, was almost like I don't know what you want to call him. I don't want to say filing clerk, because that sounds a little bit derogatory, but he's the guy that's amassing all of these ideas, because he's kind of amassing all the artwork, I suppose. And And so it sort of make complete sense if you think about it, that he would suddenly take all this like physical artwork and ideas of, well, we could do this segment, we could do the river raft sequence or whatever from the book, and then try and assemble it all into a script. It's almost like he did it not because he fancied himself as the next Jurassic Park screenwriter, but because he needed to order the ideas into something coherent. It was more, I think, for himself than even for Spielberg necessarily. It was just like, right, well, we've come up with all these ideas. Let's try and assemble it into a kind of a working I think working document was the phrase that he and I sort of kind of came up with, in the sense of this is how we can refer to it, rather than script, because that might sound a bit too official, because he wasn't officially brought on as a screenwriter. Yeah, he had this sort of working document, and it's, I've never really heard of anyone else. I mean, you said that he's never really done that with any other script, on any other project, and I've never really heard that done in any other film either, for any other production designer. But I suppose at the time, Spielberg, they were still in flux with the Jurassic script. They weren't happy with it. They weren't unhappy with it, but they weren't like, it wasn't quite nailing it in the way they wanted. So it made total sense for him to try and assemble some ideas in a kind of logical script form. But yeah, and it shows how long he was on that project as well, that he had the time to do that. I think it's kind of amazing, really.
Well, yeah, because he had additional time to work on it during Hook, because Spielberg went off to go and work on Hook, which Rick was not involved in. So him and the art department stuck around during that time and came up with these additional ideas, and that's what he put into his script. Because there were certain ideas that weren't in Crichton's script or even his novel that the art department team had kind of come up with, and Spielberg had come up with, including the helicopter rescue attempt where they're trying to get everyone off the island on the helicopters at the helipad, but the T-Rex is still coming after them. Like, that was all from production meetings, and then Rick put that in his script, and then I think it also carried over into Marmo's script, interestingly enough. So in a way, it's kind of like the stepping stone. Carter did that, and the art department did that, and then Marmo ran with it in her way, and then it ended up just getting axed by the time Kep came on. So it still was part of the process, though, scenes like that, and trying to adapt them, fit them in. Maybe it was cut for budgetary reasons, or maybe they just thought they didn't need it at that point anymore. I mean, there's so many different reasons they could cut things, but it's still fun that they were able to play around with it until they got it right. But yeah, it is good that it's being referred to as a working document, like you said, because yeah, he was never hired as the screenwriter, and I mean, I don't think he got like permission or anything, didn't need it, but he just kind of went off and did this because he felt like it was the right thing to do, and that's what it needed.
Yeah, definitely. And there are some cool ideas in his one. That's the one with the squirting umbrella, isn't it, as well? I'm now trying to remember, because there's so many scripts and ideas float between them. But that's the one with the raptor print.
Oh, the spitter print. Yeah. They're being attacked by a raptor, and then opens the umbrella, it's the spitter, and it squirts water. They also had like the lava fields, which ended up being way adapted in Fallen Kingdom to a greater extent with the volcano.
Yeah, because I think I asked Rick whether Colin would have seen that document, i.e., whether the lava fields would have, in Rick's script, would have inspired him, and I don't think that was the case. But you never know what Colin might have been rooting through the archives, actually, and then come across that. You never know. But or maybe even Rick just told him at some point about that idea, and then Colin ran with it. But or it could just be a shared collective consciousness, that kind of an idea. I mean, it kind of makes sense, really, when you've got an island like that. There's going to be lava floating around at some point or another. But yeah, back to Rick's script, he had a ton of great stuff in there, and I think it's a well-written script as well. I mean, the guy obviously is very used to reading other people's scripts and breaking them down, so he knew about the construction of scripts, and he obviously knew the Crichton novel inside out. He knew what would work, and probably by that time had talked to the likes of Dennis Muren, etc., on the visual effects side, to know what might be possible, to actually realize these things, because it's all very easy writing it down on your typewriter, and a little bit more trouble. Well, these days it is easy to pull all that stuff off if you know what you're doing with computers, but back then, as we know, they were breaking new ground. Basically, didn't even know if half of it would work. I think was pretty much the the feeling coming out of those production meetings. But I think between Kep and Rick's contribution and Malia's contribution, there was enough material there to talk about the script, because the key thing with the book was not to repeat material in the visual history book. And that's actually quite difficult because I'd sort of poured everything I knew into that visual history book. But, and of course, there was elements about the scripts in there. But yeah, I had to sort of go to just, I mean, it was great to be able to talk to those guys because you could ask them little bits and pieces, and get little nuggets about things that just didn't make it in the visual history book, or things that I never asked them in the first place. I mean, all the stuff from Rick could kind of go straight in there because I never talked to him about, because as I was saying, I didn't know about his script.
Well, he didn't know either. He
He
forgot.
didn't. Well, yeah. He seemed, well, when I spoke to him, I'm surprised he didn't bring it up at some point. But I think that rather speaks to his modesty more than anything else. But yeah, so all that stuff could go in there. Then the Malia stuff, as I was saying, was all kind of brand new. And then the Kep stuff, well, like I said, I had spoken to him before, so I needed to go in on different angles and just try and drill down on certain scenes, really. Try not to get him to repeat stuff that he'd already told me, and and try and fix on different things. I mean, it was a very, very long time ago when he did that adaptation, and he's sort of like, I think he remembers some things, of course, but so you had to try and be pretty specific. But I think I managed to come up, and then there were some random things in there. I'm now trying to remember what got cut and what got made, but like you always had to try and keep it script orientated, basically, so or book orientated. So I was allowed to drill back into the Crichton book. So there was that thing about Michael Bax, the guy who he's referenced in the novel, I think, in some reference. He's like a sort of guy that Crichton knew for real, and he helped out with some of the computer stuff, computers systems together for the for filming Jurassic Park, and he's also referenced in the Crichton novel. It's kind of like an in joke, I guess. So you could sort of like write, that's like a little trivia thing. You could write about that because that wasn't in the visual history book, and it's in the book, and then he turns up. Well, at least he worked on the film in some capacity. So I think he was like the graphics display supervisor or something like that. I'm now trying to remember, but so as long as it was sort of in the book or in the script in some capacity and wasn't massively talked about in the visual history book, then that's kind of how I worked on the annotations. It was like, right, let's try and find something interesting to say that I haven't already said, which was tricky, but kind of doable in the end when you had that material from, Kep and Malia and Rick.
Yeah, no, I definitely think you were able to mine some additional details because, I mean, like you said, you only had so much of a word count for the previous book that not everything could be focused just on the scripts. So it was nice to kind of expand upon, the storytelling process of how the film was adapted from the novel. I mean, a lot of people were always interested in how that worked, especially because Crichton did work on it early on. I mean, it is unfortunate that we weren't able to speak to him ever about it, but I mean, at least we were able to get information, from people that did work with him. And even just from the scripts themselves. I mean, luckily we do have a couple drafts of his that he worked on. We discovered those and we were able to, mine information just from even comparing them, like the process of like, oh, so, they changed the beginning of this or, added this scene and took this scene out. I mean, it's always kind of nice to see how that process works, and then if things might even return later on. For example, in Rick's script, Hammond is the first one that talks to Grant and Ellie at the dig site. He was the first one to have Hammond go because in the books and in Crichton's drafts, it was Donald Gennaro, the lawyer, that goes to greet them. But then I forget if he does that in Marmo's script, but then obviously he does again when Kep comes back. He has Hammond be the one. So it's interesting that certain little details like that still carry through, even if they're done differently. It's still interesting to see the process and to have that kind of focus. And I think that this book does this very well, especially the scenes that you choose to expand information upon, like of course the river sequence, which we find out why Kep cut it out for one, because he never had it in his drafts at all. He knew from reading the book apparently that he was going to cut it out, right? So it never was in a draft, but it was in all the other drafts. So it's interesting that he was the one that made that cut finally, and probably saved them a lot of money and headaches trying to figure out how to make it work back in 1992 when they filmed it. So
we should, by the way, stop here and credit you for being A, helping on the visual side of things, B, helping well, just reading through it and being the perfect Jurassic sounding board as you were. I mean, when you do these books, mistakes do creep in, or, you never intend them to, but they do. And, it's infuriating if it ever makes it to print. But, thankfully we had you to sort of keep a watchful eye on the text, and you were brilliant. So I shall thank you here on this podcast.
no, thank you. That no, I mean it means a lot that you're the one that got me on board for this book to begin with. So I mean, thanks go to you as well for sure. But I mean, I think it helps that I've been like a full-time Jurassic Park fan, it feels like, which is whereas for you, you're dipping in all sorts of different fandoms for the books that you do. So I mean, you can't be as on it 24/7 like I've been all these years. So I mean, it definitely makes sense.
Yeah, you're completely right, and I wish I could be that knowledgeable, but I don't think my brain isn't large enough to accumulate all that information. But yeah, I think every book should have a Derrick on them, basically helping them to get things right. But no, but we all know that, as we were saying, the Jurassic fan base is hardcore, and they expect accuracy, and that's the least they should expect, especially if they're paying money for a book. So yeah, it was great to have you to help out in that sense. But yeah, and you came up with some great ideas. I mean, some of them didn't make it in, which I wish, as there was your friend Caroline, if I'm remembering this correctly.
Yeah, Caroline Quinn, she was the production assistant on Jurassic Park. And actually, I mean, it was kind of late in the game when I spoke to her, so I think that was partially why there just wasn't really time to kind of fit her stuff in. But her dad came up with a joke that ended up in the movie, and it was the "Do you think Thinkosaurus" joke that Tim says in the tree with the brachiosaurs are around. So, we were trying to get at least that part of her story in the book, but it just didn't make the cut for whatever reason, possibly word length. But we were at least able to get a couple of her slides that she helped create that you see in the boardroom scene in when Hammond is talking to everyone during lunch. And the projectors are projecting different images all around the room. And yeah, some of those slides are in the book, just a couple of them, but it's still pretty cool to have them there. And that was like a very last minute addition. I kind of had to like fight for it kind of thing. But it was great.
I really wanted that. I do remember asking Kep about the jokes in that sequence where they're sitting in the tree. Yeah, he didn't have much to say, so perhaps that's why. And it really should have gone in there, but didn't. And that's again all part of the process of writing a book, is that not quite everything you really want makes it in there. Yeah, it's a shame, because it's good that it's out there now. You've told people about it, so hopefully people will hear this and will know that she deserves a little bit of credit too for providing that sort of tender moment in the tree.
Oh yeah, her dad does. I mean, it was literally a dad joke that her dad told her. So it's like dad joke literally became a dad joke in the movie. So it's great. But yeah, no, it was really fun. Like I'd never done anything quite like this before, like on a professional scale, like professionally consulting on a book. I've done some other consultation work, like with Criterion Collection. I consulted on a movie once that they did. It was called Journey to the Beginning of Time, if anyone's curious. It also has dinosaurs in it, so there you go. Working on this though, which is really fun because I was amassing so much information to try to, lend to them to fill up the book, including like certain images that, Universal didn't have that the artist had done. I mean, that's the thing. It's like these artists like John Bell and David Lowery, they really poured so many hours and thousands of sketches into just one movie, let alone how many more they've done since. I mean, that's just crazy. Their hands must be extremely tired. So, it was kind of crazy trying to gather thousands of images and send them to Chris Prince, who was the initial editor, and then also Harrison, who was the second one after that, that worked on this book. And they really, had a lot to sift through. So I kind of don't envy their work as well, going through all the stuff I gave them in addition to their access to the Universal archives. It was always important for me that this information and this artwork, wouldn't be lost and that it would be seen in some way that could really bring it together and with context. That's the important thing. I always like to have context of like who did it and like what process of the production it was in. And and Rick Carter helped out a lot with that. I mean, he had his own collection he helped me mine through as well. So I mean, it all came together pretty nicely for the book. I think I like I said, even though there's a few things that didn't quite make it in there that I kind of wished did, I would say like 95% of what I wanted did. So I was very happy with how the book turned out. And obviously your annotations were done extremely well, and just really interesting stuff that even I didn't know, especially from Marmo. But that's why I'm so glad you got to talk to Marmo. And I think a lot of people that have read the book are, because she had new information, including I think my favorite one is when she mentions that she gave Spielberg or the casting directors the idea of looking into Laura Dern for Ellie Sattler. And I don't think anyone knew that. And, thank God she did that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I wonder if other people will say, no, it was my idea to cast Laura Dern. But it's great that she said that. No, it's good that she's had a chance to speak on the project, because she was clearly, as I was saying earlier, heavily involved at a certain point in its gestation. I mean, I would say in terms of the artwork, because I can say this, because obviously I had very little to do with choosing it, or nothing really to do with choosing it, because as you said, it was Chris and then Harrison that was sort of sifting through all this. But you'd know this as a sort of barometer, let's say. You've probably seen all the Jurassic images that are out there in terms of the stuff that we've all seen, if you know what I mean. Like the stuff that is in the visual history book is good, but I think you probably would have looked at that and thought, well, I've seen most of these things already, because you know it all so well. So the fact that the script book can come out with stuff that, well, you'll know it because you helped source it, but probably a lot of your friends who are hardcore fans may not know a lot of this stuff, and because it's coming from quite rare archives and sources, and I mean, certainly I hadn't seen a lot of this stuff. So, and as you say, it's great to put it in context as well, rather than just putting random images in there. But they do make good companion pieces, those two books, if you're a Jurassic fan. I think in a way, the things that perhaps I wasn't able to include in the visual history book, whether it's artwork or text, some of that at least has gone into this. So they do work together well. Not that I'm convincing everyone to go out and buy both of them, although of course I would like that.
But
But
you should.
but you should. Between the two books, they're a huge deep dive into the making of that, certainly the making of that first film. And obviously with the visual history book, it touches on, well, more than touches on, the Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 has its own chapters devoted to those. So yeah, I think if you're a huge Jurassic Park fan of the first movie, both of those books will give you an enormous insight. And I think, judging by sort of reviews I've seen, I think people were quite surprised. They thought it was going to be a bit of a quickie book. The script, obviously, that's the key thing. The kept sort of working version is the script that we build the annotations around. But I think people thought it was just going to be that and not much else and a few pretty pictures. But it's a lot more than that. So, and we tried to make it something that wasn't just a cash grab, basically, just because it's got the word Jurassic on the title. It's we tried to make it something that was, had value to Jurassic fans, and I think we did do that.
No, I definitely think you guys did, and I'm so happy to have been a part of it. I mean, that's kind of like a little Derrick's dream to have been involved in like an official Jurassic Park product, especially one that involves like the scripts and the artwork. Because I remember when I was like a little kid and I read the Making of Jurassic Park book, the Jodie Duncan one, and was just so entranced by all the images and the information about like, oh, how the story came to be and everything, and also wondering like why isn't that in the movie, like seeing the pictures of like the river sequences and everything. So that was like, to be involved in a book that kind of expands upon what began back in 93 with those kind of books. It was just, I couldn't be happier. I mean, that's why I hope that we can do more of these, even like a Lost World book would be a good idea. So we'll see.
Well, Lost World will be superb. So we'll hopefully do that. We don't know yet, but that would be a fantastic book to do. But I have to say, I've said this before in various things, but I'd like to say it again. I mean, we touched on it already, and you mentioned it a second ago. But the Jodie Duncan book, uh, like you, I'm sure I've read plenty of making of books, and that is probably one of the greatest. Never mind that it's anything to do with Jurassic, the the access that Jodie had, and I would say, if frankly, if you're going to buy the two books that I worked on, or the two Jurassic Park related books that I worked on, then get the making of Jurassic Park from Jodie Duncan as well, because it's got some incredible stuff in it. So
Maybe we'll see you again as well for the next Jurassic Park movie, I would think. I mean, whoever's doing that.
yeah, who knows? Who knows? That's a way away yet. But yeah, now it's a kind of, I suppose, if they reissued the Jurassic World visual history book and then I expanded it to include a chapter on that, that's probably the best way that would be done, rather than a separate book. But who knows? We shall see. We shall see. I mean, that's a little way off yet, but would be nice. Would be nice. I mean, the world visual history book would be worth expanding, because it's not just that film that's coming. There's the video game. Is it Survival?
Yeah, Jurassic Park Survival. So it's basically the day after the events of the first movie, and you're following this new scientist. I forget her name, but there's this new scientist character, and you play her trying to get off the island, I'm assuming. So honestly, I feel like that could have made like a cool little movie too, like a very intimate movie, if you will, because it's just one character you're following, kind of like Castaway with dinosaurs, right? So I think that could have been interesting, but yeah, and it looks amazing. People have wanted that forever, like a first person kind of Jurassic Park game. They've wanted that for years. I mean, the closest we got was Trespasser, which was the Seamus Blackley game that came out for The Lost World back in 98. But yeah, it's been that long since we had something like that.
Well, also the graphics are now so good. It's like it now is the time to sort of produce, you know what I mean? The 1998 game, I mean, obviously the graphics are going to be rudimentary. So here it's like, well, now is the time to kind of do a really full on, horrifying, as it were, Jurassic survival game. I think that will be a huge hit. So there's obviously that to talk about. You mentioned the Camp Cretaceous spin-off earlier. There's other things going on in the Jurassic universe, not just a new film, which obviously will be a centerpiece, but it's a living, breathing, organic franchise. And even when there aren't films around, there's always been, video games or comics or whatever, novels, spin-off novels, all that kind of stuff. So they're very clever in the way they keep it in the public consciousness, I think. I mean, I think primarily people revisit the first Jurassic Park, people have kids and then the kids watch it and all that sort of stuff. I think people still think that is an incredible film, and rightly so. Even though Dominion didn't get great reviews, people still went out and saw it. And yeah, I think there's still a hunger for all this stuff. So that's good for our point of view.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it does help that it isn't overexposed. So maybe that it was a good thing we didn't get certain things we wanted so soon. Like I know people wanted a live action TV series and still do. I still do. Maybe like a TV series about the creation of Jurassic Park or even the creation of Jurassic World might even be more interesting because it's like there's like a 14-year gap between those two movies. Like what happened during that time? We still kind of don't really know everything, to be honest, unless you go into like viral marketing kind of stuff for minor explanations of things. It's something people have wanted to see. So there's definitely a lot of venues that can go for the past and the future, but life will find a way.
Very good. Very good.
Well, thank you, James, for coming along and talking about how this amazing script book came to be and the process on all the books that you've done for the Jurassic universe, and hopefully more to come.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me, Derek. And again, thank you for your help along the way. You've been a huge supporter, so it's all much appreciated. And yeah, I hope people really, really dig the book, and maybe we can come back one day and talk about a Lost World script book. That'd be great.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I mean, I guess it would mean I have to do another crazy video like the one I did where I was running around my little preserve and stuff. So maybe it'll be a little fun excursion to do something else like that. I'll go to San Diego, who knows? But but yeah, no, great. I mean, thank you for coming along and we'll talk soon.
All right, man. Take care. Cheers.